Okay. Good. We are in session and we'll reopen the public hearing. So,
Okay. If there's any questions or any concerns you have with the budget, now's a good time to ask them and present them. This is your time.
I have one question.
Yes.
If it's there, I missed it. I didn't see in the budget a line item for paying the principal of debt service. Did I miss it?
Can you repeat that, Carol? What did you ask? I couldn't hear it
If
again.
there's a line item for paying the principal on the budget.
Oh, okay.
No, there won't be,
Debt service
because that's,
budget.
this is a P&L budget.
Right.
And the principal reduction shows on changes on the balance sheet,
Okay,
on
so
liabilities.
it would show up in cash flow.
Cash flow and liabilities, yeah, but it won't show up on the P&L.
We don't have a cash flow statement on there, but in the very last section, you will see our projected balance sheets, and those would have accurate balances.
okay, on this, in the same vein, the piece I wasn't finding was what the anticipated contribution by the two cities is. And it may be there, it's not my
That
area of
would be
expertise.
in section 3, I believe. Here, let me look at the, so, on page 51, I believe, CapEx and debt service covered.
But again, that was, looked like it was interest only, was that everything?
That is the entire debt service. Correct. Yes, the entire principal and interest comes to 1.977.
Okay, so that 95680 is the anticipated.
That would be considered a deficit.
Yeah, so that would be the shared amount the cities would be
Okay.
looking to for payment on a 45-55.
Right. Okay, that's,
Which is
I had
a
that
little
marked,
bit
but I
better than
wasn't
what we
sure
did
that
this
that was
last
what I
year.
was looking at. Are there questions before I bring my other ones? Other questions from the committee, or since we're in the public hearing from the public? Well, then I guess I'll do mine. In the presentation, you talked about the 2% COLA, 5% steps, or merit increases. The budget actually shows only a 2.5% increase. Is there, I mean, is it that a lot of people aren't going to get merit increases? I mean, what's?
That would be a good question. I'm not quite sure why it comes up to being that much, other than the fact that we're just a little bit less in payroll through benefits or whatever. I'm not 100% sure why, but it's kind of built in a little deep in my spreadsheets.
Well, when, in your budget model, when do you have assumed that there was the COLA and the merits would occur throughout that 12-month period?
Well, the 2% occurs as of the 1st of July, so right at the
Okay.
beginning of the
That's
fiscal
the
year.
2%.
And then the 5% at the beginning of the calendar year, so January 1st.
Yeah, so you know, there's a half a year's effect on the 5% because it's implemented halfway into the fiscal year, so that kind of, in simple terms, brings that down to about 2.5% from 5%. So
Okay.
typically, with that in mind, I probably would have, all other things being equal and no other effect on payroll at all, you would have thought it might have gone up about 4.5%, not the 7% that you get in terms.
And I think it's about, I believe the other factor involved in there would be our overtime, because we've had continual reduction of overtime.
Okay, and that overtime shows up in that.
Yes, it
There
does.
are other factors like that.
Okay, I just, there was.
We generally try to
Sure.
control
Yeah.
those expenses.
Good question.
Great, once we know it's a big concern. Yes, it is.
Is the COLA tied to federal inflation rate?
Fairly, I mean, it's hard to, it varies
Or
month
is
to
it
month, but yeah, it's ongoing right around 2% is
It
what.
caps at 2%, but if the federal inflation rate is less than 2%, is the COLA Less than 2%?
No, we still do 2%. Generally, because in some years you'll have a 3% inflation rate, in other years you'll have a 1% inflation rate. It usually averages out to about 2%. So we just incorporate 2% in there.
So there's no real measure that you tie to on that.
I do monitor the inflation rates. Right now, they're at about 1.5%.
Which one do you use?
Online. I just go online and look at the national inflation rates.
It might be valuable to, you know, whether or not it can be worked into this one or not, I don't know, but the city, you know, we've got a measure that we use for our non-represented people in particular. Hopefully we'll get to the representative in future negotiations. So there's some rhyme or reason to it.
Okay.
Otherwise, it appears to be arbitrary. It becomes to be something that can be negotiated. And, you know, and that's different than merit. Cost of living should reflect actually cost of living.
Okay.
And, you know, whether or not the CPI for Portland is applicable to Monmouth Independence is up for debate, but nonetheless, that is a established measure.
I think they do it for sale.
I know,
Well, maybe, but
I know
the
for-
most commonly occurring number is that CPI Portland. And there's a
CPI
better
Portland, okay.
term for that. That's not the exact name, but.
Yeah, actually, if you go into, and I've done this when I worked in corporate America with a lot of companies because I had to, but we would normally go into the full Bureau of Labor Statistics information. And that you can drill down and refine by region and by other attributes that are more applicable to your business. And, you know, in other businesses I've been with, that's been the standard that has in essence been board approved for management to use in that regard. So, yeah, we could certainly.
I would be fine with adjusting that. It doesn't even necessarily need to be in the budget because it's not going to make that much of an
Right.
impact. But I would be fine with adjusting that. I took the my experience from working with the state of Oregon, and the state of Oregon, all of those cost of living increases are negotiated between the union and the state. So I kind of took it along those lines as here's what we're presenting, and either the budget committee can approve that or disapprove that. If you guys want me to do a little more investigation into what the inflation rate is, base those raises upon that, I will certainly do that.
I think with having said that, and it's a good point that you bring up, my recommendation would be for management to go back, formulate the data source, if you will, or
Right.
information source it's going to use, and the reasons why the one it chooses and the portions of it chooses are appropriately applicable to the MINET business. At the next board meeting, just bring that to the board, explain it. If the board is satisfied with that, then that's what management can use. And, you know, the budget can stand the way it is. Because the real test is what are you administering, right?
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, so we can do that.
I think that would be, that would protect you some. Because you could say, hey, listen, this is what we're using. The board has said this is what we use. Yeah, but last year, man, you were good to us. You gave us a, 2.5, man, I appreciated that. Darts.
Let me give you
As susceptible as MINET is to what I call frivolous legal action, I think it's, where there's an opportunity to protect ourselves, I want us to take advantage of
Absolutely.
that. Could I be wrong, but do we not have access to a pretty darn good resource for making these types of calculations, Mr. Ferry?
Yes, you do.
That's what I thought.
It's not hard, just to read it there, just pick a benchmark. I mean,
Right.
the easy ones we use, LGPI, which we've used before for services, they used to have a nice little, just drops out without having to go through all the minutia. And so you just pick either a month, or you pick first half, second half of the year, and you pick the W and a U, depending how you want to slice and dice. But the only different one there would be, if it's just general that, if there's something you're trying to get, like Mark said, down to like tech industry, that might be something a little different. Like there's a separate out there construction index, and so we use that for like our building permits. And that's a different, that's, what's going on in the building industry. Materials is very different than, cost to buy bread and apples and everything.
This is the big ticket item. There are two CPI indices. there's the CPIW, which I understand the city uses, which comprises around, I did the research on this a number of years ago, it's around 30% of the workforce. And it tends to be wage earners, hourly, and clerical types. Anyway, it covers around 30% of the population. There's a CPIW, which covers about 70% of the population, and that includes the CPI, the W group, in addition to that, the salaried and professionals and so on. So when I was Director of Labor Relations for the state for a number of years, we used the CPIU. We used it in contested hearings, and I did that for 20-some years. I never, ever lost that point in the hearing, never. Secondly, the Consumer Price Index, we call it the cost of living index really, but there isn't anything better. So it includes not only wages, but also other things, such as in health insurance. And I would throw out for consideration that any percentage increase in compensation include the component of insurance, so that if you're going to use a CPIU as a benchmark, that you show the wage or the salary, whatever it is, and then the appropriate level, appropriate amount of insurance. So if you're using monthly, so-and-so makes $3,500 a month, and you pay some figure, and those two together are their compensation. It's not all of it, but it's the lion's share of it. And then anything that percentage increase would have to be measured against those, at least those two, and maybe other things as well.
A clarifying question, you're talking about workers' comp insurance, correct?
No, I don't think so.
Health and welfare.
Or health?
Health insurance.
Yeah.
Okay, but that doesn't really have a bearing on the amount an employee makes. I'm just trying to
The amount that you pay shelters them, the fact that they have insurance shelters their income from the increase in
Okay.
medical costs. So yes, it does.
Do you know if CPIU or CPIW includes housing?
It includes rent, doesn't necessarily, that's what I remember.
Okay. And I remember we used CPIW, right, in Independence, and we clarified that with Portland too. You can get, we use CPIW Portland, and if you use CPIW Portland right now, yeah, rent is.
It's going to be convoluted, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say that would be an anomaly.
Right. One last point. There are, in fact, local regions or sometimes cities, and I don't remember off the top of my head whether Portland includes the labor market that includes, you can look on the labor and unemployment report. It's called the Metropolitan Statistical Area. It includes Clark County, Loma County, Yamhill County, Marion County, Polk County, and I probably missed one, Washington, and Clackamas. So I don't know if the CPI for the Portland area covers all those or not. You have to look. You can also get regional ones. You can get Western United States. You can get Northwest. You can whatever. But I would suggest that if we're going to look into this, I know some of you here would almost rather stab yourself in the eye than deal with numbers. But if you're going to do this, then we should come up with a consistent look, so you can tell whether it increases or decreases.
Another metric is the employee and how one can protect the employee against bad CPI numbers. In my pension plan, I capped the cost of living. I'm capped at 2%.
Okay.
But if there is an excess, let's say if we have an inflation rate of 3%, then I have a bank that I can add that 1% to for future use, so when the inflation rate is lower. Now, I've been on this pension system for 20 years, and I still have 4 points in the bank, because it's always been, on average, above 2%.
Okay.
Just something to think about.
Yeah.
I think the one suggestion was good, just come up with something, bring it back to the board.
Yeah, we'll do that.
And easy one, you can just check with the two, see if you don't know what we do, just so there's some overlap, consistency with everyone.
Yeah, I wouldn't think the applicability to MINET would be highly inconsistent with the cities.
Pick the mark and keep going with it. The main thing is you stay with the same benchmark, you don't flux around all the years.
So before we take any more questions, Darren, I wanted to make sure that the questions that you sent were all answered fully. Okay.
Thank you for your response, yep.
Cool. Any more questions?
So, okay, I'll go on with my list.
Sure.
Under consultants, who all is covered under that?
The
I
consultant,
figured that you're there, but I wasn't sure who
Mark
else.
would be the brunt of it, I believe, but we do also have in there CCG, our regulatory consultant, and then also originally we were having some IT consulting last year, but that's not in there this year.
Yeah, and that was footnoted. By the way, your footnotes were.
Thank you, appreciate that. Other than that, those are the main two that are in there. I can't think of any other ones right off the top of my head. Can you?
No, those were the main two.
Yeah.
Okay, and along that same path, in the budget narratives, it said that, okay, the CFO would continue for this next fiscal year, throughout the year. Is there a phase-out plan? I mean, now that we've got a finance director and all of that, or are you anticipating that those two positions need to be?
Let me respond to that, if I may. Mark and John and I, really from the get-go, have had a plan that we review regularly on bringing John up to speed on the, if you will, the daily ins and outs of the financial needs and process for MINET, because we've had to learn ourselves along the way, quite frankly. The short answer to your question is as John has come up, we've changed the use of Mark with some of the special projects now that we're getting involved in helping us design business plans to talk intelligently about them. Utilizing Mark as we originally hired him is diminishing rapidly because John's doing a very good job, very good job. But we will need to continue to have John's work periodically overlooked by Mark. And as our special projects come down, I see the overall use, sorry Mark, the overall use, but this has been out on the table from day one, diminishing as our special project needs, if and when those diminishes as well. But he's also doing an oversight on John. We still need to do sanity checks on what he's doing.
Which is also good for audit purposes. You know.
Oh,
Uh,
John?
Following up on Robin's discussion regarding the consultants, I go to footnote 8 on page 46, and it talks about the requirement of the 15-16. The last sentence, though, says, currently this expense is not expected to recur in FY 216-17, but it's
Sorry,
budgeted.
which footnote was that again?
8.
8, okay.
But it's budgeted. So, I mean, I think clearly it needs to be budgeted. It's just that the footnote was confusing.
But the footnote is confusing, and what the footnote is relating to is that, as John mentioned, the company incurred a significant amount of cost from an IT consulting firm.
Yeah.
And all the remediation work that had to be done for the company to bring it in compliance and in position to be able to have the sufficient ability to go out and develop these new businesses.
Yes.
And the board's aware of that because
Yes.
Don has numerous times brought it. Yeah, that element is the non-recurring.
It's more the decrease in the budget compared to what we did this year. That difference isn't going to be an ongoing expense. And that's what I was trying to portray in the footnotes, and I apologize for not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I assume that it was something like that because I didn't anticipate that would go away completely.
No, it won't.
0 versus 121,400
No,
Yeah.
that is there to stay for.
Yeah, as it should, sure.
Yes.
Okay, are there other questions? Discussion of other elements of the budget? Do we need to go through it line by line? I think everybody's had a chance to really.
I just don't need the crushing headache of
Do we want to go through it section by section, or are you guys?
As far as I'm concerned, if everyone has all their questions and concerns answered, I wouldn't mind moving to the approval process.
Last call for questions.
John looks like he's trying to formulate.
Well, I had a couple notations, but I'm not sure I can bring them into
We've got lots of time, so.
Yep, lots of time.
Well, I'm trying to get to the capital expenditure piece,
If you're looking for the capital expenditure page, that would be, the details would be on page 55. Yep, right there.
Right. Yeah, I just did a glance, drive-by on this, but didn't really get a chance to drill down. Where does the year-over-year comparisons come on this?
On the CapEx?
Yeah, I'm only seeing that.
I don't think that we have last year's capital expenditures on there. I apologize, John. We do not have a comparison in this budget on last year's. They are it's actually pretty close. I mean, I believe this comes to about, 332,000. I think we had around somewhere around 350,000 last year in capital expenditures as well.
Why would we not have that?
It's never been requested. Hasn't been something.
I mean, typically, you don't have that because capital expenditure requirements typically aren't recurring. It's not a comparison of how many of these pieces of equipment did I buy this year versus last year, because typically capital expenditure requirements, it's a different basket of fruit, if you will, every year.
Yeah, there's going to be some that are going to recur, and you're going to have ups and downs, certainly.
No, not really. The only thing that's going to recur is
The installation
the
cost.
components for the installation cost on there. That is definitely a reoccurring item, and that's an unusual item in capital expenditures because it's an industry item in this industry. In other businesses, you wouldn't find that in the capital expenditure budget. That would be in the operating budget because it would be in cost of goods sold, not in capital expenditures. But typically, for example, the trucks, the fleet of trucks, they don't continue to buy trucks every year because trucks have long lives. Capital expenditures typically have, at a short life, computer equipment, smaller computer equipment, 3 years. Longer lives for other equipment, 5 to 7 years. And then once you get out into fiber optics and land and building, that can go out anywhere from 10 to 40 years. And so, so the reason we don't usually show it in any business I've ever been with, a comparative capital budget, is because it's not like, okay, I have personnel costs this year, I have the same employee base this year, I have the same employee base next year. I want to see how that compares from year to year. Capital expenditures are just different items each year.
So the only thing that's comparable would be the install supplies, and those are
The thing of note would be, well, was my capital expenditure budget last year $200,000, and why is it $1.2 million this year? I mean, and last year, I believe the capital expenditure budget was somewhere between $350,000 and $375,000 in total, which is pretty comparable to this year. It's just that the items in this year's budget that management identified as requirements just happen to be different items than they were last year, except for those installation components. And quite frankly, The amount in it for installation components, I believe, is just slightly less than last year, and that's because, given the fact that we're pretty close to capped out on market penetration in terms of doing new installs and components needed for either repairs or, those kind of things. I think PJ did a really good job of analyzing and planning the least amount of those components and costs that he thinks he can get the job done with, so.
Mhm.
Well, and fair enough. However, if you've got large capital expenditures that may be on the horizon, if nothing else, it would reflect, looking backwards, but looking forward as well, would reflect planning. If we've got to buy, use example, trucks or vehicles.
Right.
Sure. We're going along, we got 5 vehicles, and man, they're all on the same timeline. Holy crap, when they go, we're gonna have a big bubble.
And you're right, yeah, and that's what you're gonna see in our strategic plan and financial model, where we're looking forward into a 5-year time
So you get some
horizon.
phase.
So what you'll see then is you'll see a 5-year capital expenditure plan. And in the financial model, you may call that a budget, but it'll be a forecast
Sure.
of capital requirements out the next 5 years. Yeah.
Sure. And at that point, and again, we have a little bit of this, we have a little difficulty getting this information to the city as well for looking backwards. If we're in the middle of a 5-year plan, what was 1 and 2? We're at 3. What did we actually purchase in 1 and 2?
Yeah.
And it often revolves around police cars or, that kind of thing. It's never a problem, but it's just in terms of being, for the layperson to understand.
Sure, I understand.
Where we're going, you gotta have a little idea.
Well,
what
and
we're doing.
if it would be useful for you and the board, outside of the budget itself, we can put that schedule together in a couple hours, because we have the information from last year's capital budget. We have the information, what we actually spent out of last year's capital budget, and then we have this budget. We can probably put you a schedule together in a couple hours or less.
Well,
And we'd be glad to do that.
yeah, I'll take you at your assurance that we've got pretty much a ongoing expense there. And not-
Well, a lot of maintenance, especially with
Sure.
our cable systems and.
But I think as we begin to plan for, the technological upgrade that's going to be necessary, that'll need to be, to the degree that some of that can be phased in. And maybe it can't be, I've forgotten the details on that, but if it can be, then we certainly need to be able to track that.
Well, even in regard on that point to like set-top boxes, given where the technology's going and the cord cutting and all that, the company has to critically think about how much more is it going to invest in better set-top boxes?
Yeah.
Because what's the life of those going to be, and the value to the customer and the value to the, but all of that's going to be sorted out and plotted out, if you will, as part of our strategic plan and financial model.
And John led into it, but that's what I'd be more interested in, is the strategic plan and how it relates to the 10G upgrade, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Because that's going to be a lot of money.
Right.
And so.
Along with many of our growth opportunities are going to be reflected here.
Yeah.
That we feel confident about, that are not reflected either the revenue received on them or expenses that will be incurred as a result of them aren't reflected in this. This is as though nothing changes, essentially.
This is the existing
Our
business.
operations.
But yeah, and so when the board sees the strategic plan and financial model, I want to make sure it's built out in 2 components: existing business and the reinvented or new businesses of MINET. So you can clearly see and delineate the requirements that relate to going forward over the next 5 years, the continuance of this business and moving forward into the new business opportunities.
We really wanted you guys to see a realistic budget of stability on our current business model, as opposed to trying to make promises that we can't keep. I hope that we will beat this budget to death before the end of this year, but this is what's guaranteed.
questions, discussion? I'll make a motion to approve the budget.
I move that we approve the 2016-2017 budget.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor of approval of the budget as submitted?
Say aye.
Say aye.
Aye.
Or if you're in the Lions, you could say roar. Those, anyone opposed? Abstentions? You guys have a budget.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your participation.
Very much.
When do you expect your 5-year strategic plan to be?
I think they're supposed to submit it to the next meeting.
No.
The format?
Just format.
Oh, the format, that's.
We're looking at probably around September, October timeframe.
Sometime in the fall.
Sometime in the fall.
And that, you know, that process will work its way through the Financial Advisory Committee initially, which makes a lot of sense because they have, given the composition of their membership, they have a lot of valuable input off of management in that regard. And then, once it kind of passes through that, it'll be presented, discussed with the board, et cetera. How that from there, you know, infuses itself out to the cities and city councils, I think, you know, since the MINET board membership has representatives from the city council, they can decide, and if it's a decision that, you know, management would be requested to present that to each city council, I'm sure that we can certainly make that happen as well.
I think that will make a significant PR
Sure.
that, at least in our community, we have a lot of interest in having a business plan.
Sure.
So I'm sure that
We
will
will accommodate
Well
whatever,
received.
we will accommodate whatever the community's interest and needs are.
Careful what you
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
do.
Yeah. Good point.
John spoke earlier, he used the word guarantee.
True, I did. That is our projections.
We're done?
Cool, thank you guys very much.
Did you
Appreciate your
officially
time.
close the
I
public
did.
hearing? Was that right
Oh.
before the?
Yes, I did.